She's now bragging about the success of Snow White, which is a movie that's going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars, and mainly because of her and because nobody wanted to support her.
Disney's Bob Iger says their mission is to entertain, not send messaging as Snow White sales compete for worst performing live-action Disney adaptation ever.
The chatter surrounding Snow White 2025 was full of anticipation, but it also carried a hint of unease. Rumors swirled about insane script changes, behind-the-scenes drama, and a leading actress whose comments rubbed loyal Disney supporters the wrong way. Now that the film has finally emerged, we're left with an unexpected twist, outraged audiences, near-empty theaters, and talk that Disney might be quietly yanking merchandise off store shelves to avoid an even bigger headache. How could a beloved fairy tale end up at the center of such a debacle? And what does this fiasco mean for Disney's future? The original Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was the stuff of cinematic legend, released back in 1937 and capturing hearts around the world. Fast forward nearly a century, and Snow White 2025 was supposed to capitalize on nostalgia while giving the classic story an empowering modern spin. Instead, we're watching a controversy that has fans, critics, and even Disney executives pointing fingers at one another. Some blame newly introduced plot points, while others say the film's star, Rachel Zegler, managed to alienate half the audience before the movie even premiered.
There are empty theaters all around the country. We are now at a 1 out of 10 on IMDb for the new Snow White, and it couldn't happen to a better person.
Don't alienate half of the country when you're putting out a product meant to appeal to all. It's the Michael Jordan Republicans buy sneakers too.
And if she hadn't have opened her mouth, I think that this movie might have done well. They might have just been able to ride on the hopium of the movie and some well-cut trailers, and people would have paid to go see it, and then it would have fallen off when people knew it was garbage. But Rachel Zegler made it so hateable that you really sabotaged and took hundreds of millions of dollars from the studio. I don't know how anyone would ever want to go into business with her.
And somewhere behind it all, Disney's top leadership is grappling with a potential box office disaster of epic proportions. But that isn't the whole story. What if Snow White 2025 became a casualty of too many rewrites, too much second guessing, and a stubborn commitment to a modern message that never quite matched with the source material? When Disney first announced a new live-action Snow White, the project appeared bulletproof on paper. Fans had willingly lined up for earlier revivals, like Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin, and there seemed to be no shortage of ways to reimagine one of Disney's oldest classics. Insiders teased a fresh approach. The titular character would be portrayed as independent and driven, no longer waiting for any prince's rescue.
Her heroine cannot be in love or be saved by a man, the prince, that she's more focused on becoming the leader she was meant to be, as if women in modern day America must make that choice.
It's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about
she's gonna die.
true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
News of these progressive twists lit up social media, with some praising Disney's willingness to evolve, and others worrying that too many changes would smother the fairy tale magic. Even before filming began, though, rumblings of concern started trickling out. There were whispers that the script was undergoing constant revisions, with entire plot threads getting scrapped and replaced. People who claimed to have an inside scoop posted about some tension on set. One recurring theme, the dwarfs might not be dwarfs at all, but a ragtag band of so-called magical creatures.
Yeah, we had more dwarfs than we did viewers in most of these theaters. And as you know, there were no dwarfs other than some CGI weird generated version of them.
They had the whole dwarf midget issue where they decided they weren't going to have any midget actors, right? They were having DEI-inspired magical creatures to replace.
While no official confirmation existed at first, fans latched onto these rumors, seeing them as a sign that Disney was straying dangerously far from the original. Then, there was the question of how the new film would handle the classic romance. Was there even a prince in the story? Early leaks suggested he'd be cut down to a glorified cameo, sparking heated debates about whether this was a necessary modernization or a betrayal of the original. On one side, viewers who felt that a progressive upgrade was essential. On the other, die-hard Disney loyalists who balked at rewriting a cherished piece of cinematic history.
Be a leader as a female and fall in love and be rescued by a prince, like that's incongruous shit. That's only the left's version of what it means to be a strong woman or female empowerment.
By the time official casting announcements began, skepticism had ballooned into outright anxiety, but nobody knew just how fierce the backlash would become. A significant turning point arrived when Rachel Zegler started giving interviews about her role. At first, she seemed like a promising newcomer, talented, articulate, and openly passionate about shaking up outdated tropes. The more she spoke, though, the more some fans felt anxious. She hinted in multiple interviews that the classical love story angle was weird or irrelevant. In another conversation, she suggested the original film had a prince who basically stalked Snow White.
The original
Disney
cartoon
does.
came out in 1937,
What a
and very
timeline.
evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her. Weird.
Oh,
So we
what a
didn't do
shame.
that this time.
Such blunt commentary set social media ablaze. Suddenly, it wasn't just about whether the movie might be too modern, it was about whether Rachel Zegler respected the cherished film at all. Her remarks didn't stop there. When asked about critics who disliked the drastic changes, she pointed to a certain demographic she believed resisted societal progress. Critics say this effectively dismissed any negative feedback as backward or close-minded, further widening the rift. Soon, hashtags calling for a boycott of the movie started trending online, accompanied by memes that caricatured Zegler as the face of misguided Hollywood activism. Some who'd never batted an eye at modern remakes discovered themselves unsettled, perhaps because it felt like she was labeling anyone with concerns as part of the problem. Commentators began tracking each new statement like it was a headline, and none of them seemed to handle it. From calling elements of the original movie dated to demanding more pay for wearing a particular costume for extended hours on set.
For every one of the 18 hours I am in this Snow White dress, I expect to get paid. If it's 18 hours, I want 18 hours of pay. I'm sure she got underpaid as a Disney lead actress. People have real problems and no one gives a shit if she got paid for 17 instead of 18 on her multi-million-dollar salary, which is not calculated by the hour.
Zegler's interviews quickly overshadowed the actual plot. In an age when public relations can make or break a film, the actress's outspokenness became a deal breaker. Many now claim that before they even walked into a theater, they'd already formed a negative impression of what Snow White 2025 would stand for, and that was enough to keep them far away. One of the most jarring deviations from the original tale centered on the 7 dwarfs, or more accurately, the absence thereof. Various leaked set photos revealed what seemed to be a band of diverse, human-sized characters walking alongside Snow White. The online world erupted, questioning if these were the magical creatures rumored earlier. For a story so entrenched in the imagery of 7 distinct dwarfs, the sudden shift felt like a radical departure, especially to purists who saw it as stripping away one of the most iconic elements of the fairy tale. Critics argued that, in chasing after a new brand of inclusivity, the filmmakers ironically excluded the dwarf actors who might have otherwise gained from the roles.
Some of you want us to hire actual dwarf humans, and then we thought we would have CGI magical creatures. How about this? We'll still offend the dwarves, but we'll CGI dwarves. So we'll guarantee no employment for little people while getting rid of this other component that warranted CGI. It was the worst decision they could possibly make.
Disgruntled fans also argued that if the creative team wanted to emphasize modern themes, they could have done so without erasing beloved characters. The conversation escalated when certain advocacy groups for performers under a certain height voiced their disappointment. Their stance was that these roles had always been rare but precious opportunities, and now they were replaced by CGI or by performers who bore no resemblance to the classic dwarfs at all. Meanwhile, the love interest, once central to the original movie, was drastically toned down. Early watchers reported that the prince shows up briefly, if at all, and does nothing to propel the plot. Gone are the iconic scenes of true love's kiss or Snow White's awakening. Instead, we have a storyline that veers towards Snow White's personal ambition and leadership goals. Many viewers who typically applaud strong, independent female characters felt that this was done so clumsily that it overshadowed the fairy tale essence. These changes made it feel like the movie had discarded its heart. Behind the scenes, the production reportedly stalled several times. Insiders whispered about multiple rounds of reshoots that ballooned the budget. Each wave of reshoots was supposedly meant to address inconsistent story beats or to tweak the overall tone. But did all those tweaks really help? Some sources say the rewrites introduced brand new subplots that didn't mesh well with the existing material. Others claim entire scenes were cut and and respliced to fix tonal inconsistencies. Far from smoothing the final product, these adjustments seem to have made the issue worse. Early audience members have described the film as having abrupt transitions, disjointed character arcs, and a general sense that nobody knew what story they were telling anymore. This chaos reportedly fed into an all-out scramble during post-production, where the film's release date was quietly pushed back. While official statements at the time cited final touches or ensuring the best possible product, rumors swirled that Disney executives were in panic mode. Some fans recall seeing merchandise for Snow White 2025 in stores well before the film came out, only to watch that merchandise disappear. Was Disney putting the brakes on promotion out of growing concerns? By the time the dust settled and the film was ready for screens, the tension surrounding it was high. The real shock came on opening weekend. For a film carrying the Snow White name, crowds were astoundingly thin. People who attended reported half-empty or even near-vacant theaters. Box office trackers started crunching the numbers, and they weren't pretty. A movie with a rumored budget creeping beyond $250 million was pulling in receipts that were embarrassing. Fresh reports emerged that Disney was pulling or discounting Snow White 2025 products at various retailers. Plush dolls, t-shirts, and collectible figurines vanished from racks almost overnight. Employees at certain merchandise stores leaked that shipments were being recalled, as though the company wanted to cut its losses. With each passing day, the negative narrative cemented itself. The more the film underperformed, the less incentive. Disney had to keep marketing it. That only worsened the revenue spiral. Fans on social media started pointing to this fiasco as proof that Disney's approach to modernizing classic properties had flopped. Over the years, the studio's live-action remakes may not have been universally adored, but many at least drew a respectable global audience. This time around, the chatter was unrelentingly negative. People described the film as messy, unfaithful, or even insulting to the spirit of the original. As the box office numbers sank, heads at Disney began to roll. CEO Bob Iger faced questions from shareholders and the press alike.
Infusing messaging is not what we're up to, Iger said. We need to be entertaining. His comments were likely aimed at critics like Peltz, who accused Disney of leaning too far into woke storytelling at the expense of financial performance. Iger needs to be inspired a little bit by Trump to come in and make immediate changes. Step down, bring somebody else to make immediate changes.
With some critics accusing him of allowing an unrestrained budget and a poorly executed modernization push. Others put the blame squarely on the creative team that seemed more focused on inserting progressive messaging than delivering a coherent, magical story. Then there was the star factor. Rachel Zegler, who had essentially become the face of all controversies, was singled out by skeptics claiming her interviews had actively driven people away from theaters.
Do you know, how hard it is to find an attractive young woman in Hollywood who can act and sing? It's not hard. Who just isn't going to offend half the country. 25,000 more just like her knocking on the same doors that she had opened to her. She had the opportunity of a lifetime, and instead of being humble and grateful, she was entitled and a snot. And I will look forward to her not getting cast in any more movies for a long time until she actually does learn something about humanity and humility.
I don't need your business. You know what? Maybe Disney does. Maybe you're a tool, you're a pawn in this film. You didn't write it, you didn't direct it. You have nothing to do with the creation of Snow White.
Right.
You should shut up and do the job.
Meanwhile, the backlash felt especially jarring to Disney loyalists. They lamented that Snow White 2025 showed how not to handle a remake by alienating the original fanbase and layering in new ideas without enough care for basic storytelling. Even longtime Disney defenders wondered whether the studio had lost its ability to balance fresh perspectives with the timeless appeal that made their classics, classics. Broadly, the fiasco has ignited a bigger debate. Is Disney's strategy of endlessly rebooting its animation vault crumbling under the weight of its own ambitions? Some industry insiders suggest that Snow White 2025 could stand as a cautionary tale. Big budgets and big names don't guarantee success if the final product fails to capture the magic that people associate with Disney's heritage. Others wonder if the public has simply grown tired of these reimaginings, especially if they deviate too far from cherished classics. Whether you applaud Disney for attempting a fresh take or believe they butchered a classic, critic, it's hard to deny that Snow White 2025 has become one of the biggest cautionary tales in modern cinema. Everything from frantic reshoots to star-fueled controversies contributed to its downfall. Disney presumably intended to breathe new life into a timeless fairy tale, but by the time the final version reached theaters, all most people saw were glaring changes that felt forced. From the dwarfs being replaced by magical creatures, to the absence of any meaningful romance, to the ballooning production costs and talk of merchandise getting pulled, each issue piled onto the next until audiences lost faith. Rachel Zegler's fervent defense of the project and her pointed remarks toward critics only made matters worse. Instead of uniting fans behind a beloved princess tale, the film's rollout divided viewers like no other. So what's the real lesson behind this Snow White scandal? Some say it's a stark reminder that when you tamper with a beloved property, you'd better preserve the elements that made it beloved in the first place. Others see it as a sign that Disney should reevaluate how it modernizes classics, ensuring the magic that drew people in decades ago isn't overshadowed by heavy messaging. And there's a more practical question as well. With a price tag rumored to reach $250 million, how does the studio recoup such a monumental loss? Whether Disney bounces back with a future live-action remake that truly resonates, or scales back its ambitions altogether, remains to be seen. But there's one lingering question left: whether the colossal setback of Snow White 2025 will make Hollywood think twice before reinventing a well-loved fairy tale, especially if they risk losing the magic that made it legendary in the first place.
What's our friend screaming?